And we have a special treat today with Dr. SiriChand, who is actually one of my instructors in my integrative fellowship at the University of Arizona in Tucson. She's here live in Phoenix, and she'll be doing a cooking demo with us, as well as an explanation of introduction to Ayurvedic medicine. Really excited to have Dr. SiriChand on. Thank you so much for joining us today and being part of this. Thank you so much.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, so we're excited about that. Wanted to just to review the couple upcoming things. Next week, we do have Liz and Jared talking about psychedelic mushrooms for hard to treat mental and emotional disorders. We have Dr. Keats talking about the next Friday, the 23rd, which is a date change there because we have a professional day on the 22nd. She will be talking about breast cancer prevention with our naturopathic oncologist. And then we have Dr. Grady Kaiser, an osteopathic doctor, talking about OMT, or osteopathic manipulation therapy, the week after that. So that's what's coming up on Thriving Thursdays. And we do have a virtual group visit coming up with our two nutritionists here, two of our nutritionists, Jen being other nutritionist here. He's helping us always with these, so thank you, Jen. So Araceli and Ayla are here. They'll be joining us with Optimizing Group Gut Health, which is a virtual group visit. That is on October 20th. So we hope to see you there. That's 4 to 5:30 p.m. on that Tuesday. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. SiriChand. She is a board-certified physician, as well as Ayurvedic, I would say Ayurvedic medicine expert and a chef. And she's been really concentrating the last few years on education and outreach, and really focusing on wellness and how to keep us well and optimize wellness. So, and she's also back in 2012 through 14 when I went through the Integrative Medicine Fellowship in Tucson, which is really one of the best experiences of my educational, education in my career and life too. That was amazing. And, I just remember going out to Sprouts there in Tucson and learning all about health and learning how to actually pick good vegetables. And so just curious, Dr. SiriChand, because I know people would like to know this, what kind of got you into more holistic health and, cooking and nutrition and everything?
Well, you can hear, let me fix my volume here real quick. So one of the things that happened for me was that I had a journey with, is it echoing a little? Sorry, I'm just adjusting the sound.
I think it's okay.
It's okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
So I started studying Ayurveda in college. And what happened was I had a scenario where I went to student health, and at the student health, they said, oh, this is a problem that would do really well with a pharmaceutical solution. And I was pre-med at the time and basically entirely stressed out. It had really not much to do with anything more than that. But nobody actually had the ability to, jump in and tell me like, hey, have you looked at this? Have you thought about this? And so thus began my sort of illustrious journey with Ayurveda when I went to I was at University of Virginia, so I'm from Virginia originally. Yeah. So this is a lot of fun for me to circle back.
Yeah, exactly.
I went to Jefferson, which is the STEM high school there, and all my training was in Virginia. I went to UVA and then EVMS. Right. But, at that time, I went to this little small metaphysical bookstore in Charlottesville that was sort of off the beaten track. And I just started walking through the shelves, and you could almost say a book fell out at me. And it was a book on Introduction to Ayurvedic Cooking. And I can grab that at some point, maybe towards the end, so everyone can see it.
Yeah, cool.
It's really my first cookbook and my first introduction. And so, so it was really exciting for me to have that opportunity to learn more and to get involved right from the get-go. And from that point forward, Ayurveda really began to inform my medical journey. And it was never something I discovered outside of my training. The two were always a learning journey for me in tandem. And which makes it almost a little bit tougher because they are two absolutely different medical systems.
Yeah, certainly. And
I know you have that same experience with the medical acupuncture and the traditional Chinese medicine. And, it's really this process of trying to integrate, well, how do these things piece together and how do I conceptualize these things in a way that makes sense.
It takes time to integrate that, and you've been able to do that with your own life and career now, with really focusing on education and nutrition, and how to really help with wellness through Ayurveda. And so love to hear about, I guess you could start with, did you want to do the cooking while you're talking about Ayurveda, or
yeah, I was trying to think, how much can I multitask?
or we could do like, half and half. So
what I thought I might do is, with Ayurveda, food and your day-to-day lifestyle. So one of the things that I always like to point out is that there's a wonderful video with Dean Ornish where he talks about Swami Satchidananda as his primary teacher, who basically gave him the insight for all of the things that he teaches in his Own It program.
Oh, he was the founder of Yogaville, right? Wasn't he the founder of?
Yes, down in Yogaville, exactly.
Yes,
Swami Satchidananda was outside of Charlottesville.
Right. Okay.
And there was a big ashram there and a big spiritual community. And so this was something that as I was learning, I began to learn about these alternative communities and alternative ways of living, and things that are fully off the grid versus like 1 foot on the grid, 1 foot off. And that's also been a sort of sidebar to my journey of sort of, sometimes it's, sometimes it's one of those things that varies from time to time as to where I feel most comfortable. So, yes. But anyway,
I went to Yogaville right after med school, right when right after I graduated. That was a great experience to go back there. It's still there, right, Yogaville?
Yeah, I believe it is. They always say that after the teachers, the sort of pronounced means through which the knowledge was coming and insight was coming, that the teachers have a quality that they imbibe into the community. But the communities do long after people still live there. It's a place for intentional living. There's organic gardening.
Right,
there's shared community resource, which I think is actually a really interesting question, in terms of how we're going to move forward after this COVID process, where we're going to find connection. Yeah. A lot of people are doing a really profound amount of inner work right now. And because everyone's in the same place. So all that friction that's been in the family, bringing this sort of mindful awareness, which is a big part of Ayurveda as well, bringing this sort of mindful awareness into that process helps for this healing journey that relaxes the mechanisms of disharmony in the body. We can explain that really nicely in traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. Right. We don't have a framework for that so easily in Western medicine.
We'll have to all co-create that together. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm going to shut off my video for a bit, and we'll have you go rolling on that.
Okay. So I'm really excited, and feel free to chime in at any point. My husband always jokes that I'm really good at monologues, but I can't see any of the questions if anything comes up. So, let me see if I can do that. I can see the chat.
SiriChand, I can either Jen or I can look at the chat if there's a question. Great. we could say something if that's okay.
That would be perfect, because the chat is a little hard to read from the space
especially when you're, okay, got it.
So, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, and you'll have access to this menu. I'm going to introduce you to something called 6 Tastes Soup. And this is something that, one of the things that I've learned through the years is that it's really difficult to streamline the kitchen. So the Instapot turns out to be one of my absolute favorite things. And I actually have more than one insert for my Instapot, which is only about $20 or $30 to get an extra Instapot insert. So you can make one dish and then a second one, and you can even warm it up a little bit on the stove if you have it. It's not the thickest stainless steel for ease on the stove, but you certainly can. So what I'm going to do is run you through the recipe, then I'm going to get it started on the slow cooker, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what does 6 tastes mean and how can we conceptualize things from an Ayurvedic standpoint. This recipe, and I'm also going to talk about a couple of tips that are great from my standpoint along the way. So I think what I'm going to do here, we'll just put the dry ingredients in first. And so I have 1 cup of yellow dal. And I'm using a mung dal. There's a number of different types of yellow dal. Mung is a very popular one in Ayurvedic cooking, and it's also used for khichdi. And khichdi, I imagine a lot of your patients have learned about khichdi. And khichdi is a spiced rice and mung dal dish. So in a way, this is a variation of khichdi. And then I'm going to do so it was a cup of yellow dal, and now I'm going to do a cup, and I'm doing really good about measuring. Just know that these recipes are super flexible. If you miss a little bit or you don't have a measuring cup, it's just fine. So I add the rice in. It gives a sort of extra creamy quality to it, and I find that to be really useful. It also brings in the sweet flavor, which is very useful for certain doshas like vata and pitta. So I'll say a couple terms, but don't worry, I'll explain them a bit more if you're not so familiar. So I have a cup of yellow dal. I'm using mung dal, and a quarter cup of basmati rice. And so I'm going to just scoot that over there. And now we're going to do some of the veggies. So I'm going to have a cup of fresh zucchini. And again, this can be kind of one of those things where you get the whole family involved. I've often found that getting that quality of kids in the kitchen really helps mom feel, or dad feel, whoever's doing the primary meal prep, not so isolated. And kids actually, once they see you enjoying the kitchen, it's so often that they then sort of circle back and they say, oh, I want to help. And so really sort of acknowledging their efforts and offering gratitude for whatever it is that they feel comfortable offering is a really big step in sort of bridging that. It's one of the most common things I've seen through the COVID time is that, you know, everybody's home more. And so how do you make dishes that whoever's the primary food preparer doesn't feel like a short order cook? Restaurants have been closed. You know, I'm sure somebody listening can relate to that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I've been so busy preparing meals for everybody. And for the grain part, if you're going to be grain free, that's fine. You don't have to have a grain. You can use millet. You could use grated cauliflower. You could use brown rice. Basmati rice has a very particular quality in the Ayurvedic cooking, but it's certainly perfectly fine to use quinoa, millet, a gluten-free grain. So lots of options. I think millet is gluten-free. Quinoa is gluten-free. There's a couple of other amaranth. So there are some other options here. So we're just going to finish cutting up this zucchini. Again, you know, there is definitely something to be said for freshest vegetables possible. So I live in Phoenix, which I know is a little bit of a far away spot from you all. And I did grow up in Virginia. So all my education, all my medical school education was in Virginia. And as time went on, I sort of made my way to the West. I guess you could say I was on a spiritual quest of sorts. And so anyway, so in goes the zucchini. So the other nice thing about this recipe, which is really handy, is that you can make it in the morning or make it close to the meal, and then people can eat when they have their break. So again, let's say everybody's home, there's an opportunity here to get everybody a meal at a different time. And that is absolutely one of the things that I love about the slow cooker. And you can get really fancy in how you're cutting your veggies, but I'm just showing you how we could probably have this done, if you weren't talking and multitasking, in about 10 minutes. All the veggies could be chopped. You can even do meal prep where you have cut up on Sunday or Wednesday or whatever days you're, you know, aiming for your meal prep day. And you can cut up your veggies that you might use in sheet pan cooking and tacos or a Buddha bowl. And then you could have some of that earmarked for a soup. And so we had, let's see here, we had 1 cup of fresh zucchini and a half cup of carrots. And the other thing I'm going to show you is that we have a broth in this soup, which I'm going to show you, but this is how I start my broths. So this is a container that you can keep in your fridge. And after I put all my veggie scraps in there, and then I make a broth once a week. And I'm going to tell you about how to make that broth, because so I'm plant-based, and I'm often asked, is there a plant-based version of bone broth. And so, no, nothing quite the same, but there are some really fun things that we can add to these veggie scraps that will give us this quality of this unctuous kind of tasting broth. So next thing I'm cutting up is a leek. So it says 3 tablespoons, so a little bit less. And of course, if you had spring onion, the reason I'm doing the leek is that it has some qualities a little bit different than just basic onion. It has a bit of the astringent taste, which again, I'll talk about the taste once the soup is cooking. So in those go. And again, if you didn't have leek, that's okay. It's totally fine. But it's kind of fun to cook with leek. It's an interesting vegetable. It brings a different flavor, and a lot of people haven't cooked so much with leek. So I've been experimenting with it. All right, and now we're going to do some celery. So we have, let's see here, how much celery? A 1/4 cup or 1/2 cup of celery. So again, you could have really fancy knife skills. You could have different ways that you cut this. But again, I just try to, cruise on through it. So just sort of rolling the knife over the cutting board, protecting the fingertips. I was doing a demo the other day. My husband said, "You're looking at the camera and you're cutting at the same time. You need to be careful with that." So anyway, some of this time here, I will be looking down at the cutting board. So, and in goes the celery. So again, it's smelling really good here already. So I don't know if some of you are home, you may actually be cooking along with me, which is awesome. I do a lot of that. I have a Facebook group where I have some cook-alongs and live demonstrations and all kinds of fun stuff. So the way that I cut my greens, and I'll just show you that one more time, and you may already know this. I think we have a lot of really seasoned cooks in this group, is you take your knife and you cut that sort of dense sort of, you might just say the husk part of the kale out. And of course I can put that in my broth cup. And then the way that I cut it is I just sort of roll it up just like this, and I slice it down. This is a technique that's often used for slicing fresh herbs in sort of French cuisine. So again, just sort of rolling it up, it makes a nice thin ribbon. I don't know about you, but I don't like getting big chunks of greens in my soups. That's just me. Maybe that's not a big deal for you, but you can cut this in any way that sort of feels good for you. So, okay, so we're gonna do about a cup, but I had one more here. I'm just gonna throw that in. So you can see there's a lot of flexibility in how this comes together. So I'm just going to finish slicing this guy. And I'm always like a hurricane in the kitchen too. So we can get this, scoot this out of the way. And now I'm gonna add the fresh herbs into this. And so let's have some fun looking at that as we go.
SiriChand, one of our listeners asked, Julie asked, onions and garlic. Are there any in this recipe at all?
There's only the leek. There's no onion or garlic. And I'll talk a little bit about why that might be the case. In Ayurveda, onion and garlic cooking are not always used. But as I like to say, it is it's really about your own flavor and your own journey. But in Ayurveda, the food is meant to be a little bit more mild and not quite as strong eliciting a response. So there's not a lot of hot sauce in this, and there's no garlic.
No chili,
However,
right. Okay.
You can totally add all the sriracha and garlic that you like.
I think she was saying that garlic gives her gas, and so is there a substitute if she wanted to add that?
Oh, well, there's no garlic in it. So
right, there's no garlic in it anyway. Okay, so
yeah,
sure, okay, thank you.
Yeah, and in fact, that's actually partly why it's interesting she would say that. That's partly why, in many ways, Ayurvedic cooking doesn't utilize garlic in the cooking, is because it causes imbalances. And for some people, not everyone,
right.
All the garlic lovers out there, don't worry. But for some people, it's very aggravating to the gastrointestinal system. And so important. So what I've got here actually is a mixture of cumin, coriander, and fennel. So cumin, coriander, and fennel are spices that are used all the time in cooking, in Ayurvedic cooking. And so I just do a blend of already ground cumin, coriander, and fennel. So I'm going to do 3 teaspoons of that. And if you like to, I have an old spice grinder that I utilize for doing fresh spices. So just quickly, this is fennel. If you, let's see here, we get it on camera. This is the fennel. This is the coriander. And coriander is the seed from cilantro. And this is cumin. This is actually a black cumin. I'm out of regular cumin. So we're going to put those guys out of the way. So we've got that spice blend. And then turmeric powder. I forgot to pull that out. Let me grab that real quick. So turmeric has, of course, we know this beneficial curcumin. And a lot of people are really incorporating turmeric. And of course, I always like to say that the golden milk latte is not Ayurveda in of itself. Many people think, oh, that's Ayurveda. But there's just so much more depth than what initially comes across. So I did a teaspoon of turmeric powder. And I've got here some fresh saffron. And so, again, optional. Saffron's quite expensive, but saffron also brings in in Ayurveda a quality of astringent taste. So it has a value in terms of how the soup becomes balanced with all these different elements. Okay, so then I'm going to show you one last little kitchen gadget here. I love this so much. Let's see if I can locate it. Here we go. This is my ginger grater. And you can get these at Asian markets. They're fantastic. I really love mine. And I find ginger is hard to, I don't like ginger clumpy in my soups. And so this is a grater, and I'll show you the up close of this in a second. So you just kind of grate it along here. Actually, I can probably trade spaces here. So you just kind of move it across the top. There's this ceramic kind of nubby surface. And usually what I'll do is I'll grate it, and then I'll pour the broth or the thing that's going to sort of liquefy these ingredients over top it to rinse it off. So here you can see what that looks like. Oh gosh, it's so good. It's smelling so good in here right now. I wish you could be here with me. So here is my broth, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And this has been made from leftover kitchen scraps. And so there's basically 4 cups here. That's roughly equivalent to what you might find in the containers that you get at the store. And you can always add your bone broth if you like, if you're in that kind of, if you like that, certainly no issue there, or if maybe you do it plain. Okay, so then you can see here we've got the grater nice and clean, so no ginger got wasted. All right, we're almost done. Wow, did that not go really quickly? This is such an easy soup, but I can promise you it's so tasty. So I'm gonna add now 16 ounces of light coconut milk, and a little bit of soy sauce. And again, salt is optional. Some of you might be on the whole food, plant-based, salt-free, oil-free. I might never make it quite to that diet. I'm just a bit of a foodie at heart. And so it is what it is. But I'm gonna put a little soy sauce in here, and then we're gonna put it on the slow cooker. And it should be done just about as we're finishing. So I'll be able to show you the finished product when we finish up. So I believe that's everything I got on my list. So let me go put this on the slow cooker. And this is so exciting. I love being able to share one of my favorite recipes with you. And when I put it on the slow cooker, I just put it on the slow cook function, or Instapot actually. I put it on the slow cook function on high, and I do it for 30 minutes, and usually that's enough to cook the mung dal. Sometimes it needs a little longer, and you can tell it's done when the mung starts to not be hard when your teeth touch it. It's sort of like, wow, there's too much texture coming from the mung dal. All right, so let's recap a little bit and talk about the broth, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to Ayurveda. So appreciate you sort of hanging out with me through that. So you can see, I think that was about maybe 10 minutes. You could have all of those ingredients. Sometimes I'll prep in advance, but I wanted to just show you how quickly you can just throw all this together. So we had the yellow dal, the basmati rice, which you can make adaptations to in terms of the rice. You could have quinoa or millet or amaranth if you want to be gluten-free or grain-free. I don't know, I guess those aren't grain-free, but anyway, so you make the adaptions as makes the most sense for your diet, and you can entirely leave it out or do like a cauliflower rice substitute where you grate the cauliflower with a grater. And so then we added fresh ginger, leek, zucchini, carrots, greens, which you have any kind of variety of greens you can use. Stock, which I'm about to talk about, that was from leftover coconut milk, and then salt to taste once it's done. I usually don't salt legumes until they're done cooking for the most part. It can make them a little bit harder. It sort of impacts how they cook. Okay, so let's talk about this broth for a second, because having a good broth is sort of a fundamental element of sort of modern cooking, right? We hear all about the bone broths, but gosh, you know, I don't think the veggie broth has gotten its due recognition. So what I like to do is I will save all of my scraps from cooking and meal prep. So you can throw this into a container in the fridge, or you can throw this into the freezer for when you're ready. And then I do it in the slow cooker overnight, literally overnight. I put it on the low setting. I throw everything in there, fill it up with water, and let it go overnight. So this is a really great option, is what I found. All right, so let's say you have all your ingredients, but what is it that can make or give your broth a sort of secret sauce, if you will? So there's a couple of things, and I like to be mindful of waste. So sometimes I'll make a broth with fresh veggies if it's got a particular thing I'm wanting it to do. But generally, I try to do it with the veggie scraps because it's great from a sustainability standpoint, and it reduces perhaps some of the exposure to things that are in commercial broths. So the other things that I'll add when I put it into the slow cooker overnight is that I will make almost like a tea. I will add the cumin, and I will add the fennel. But you don't have to. You can put it over time. I will add this was coriander and cumin and fennel. So again, you start to make like almost a tea. And cumin, coriander, fennel tea, one of the mainstays that if you read about Ayurveda online these days, you can't go too far without hearing more about cumin or fennel tea. And I'll talk about that towards the end. But what I do when I make this broth is I'll add some dried shiitake, and then I'll add some kombu. And so the plant vegetables, or the sea vegetables, give us a lot of this unctuous, umami, mucopolysaccharide kind of feeling. And so this little piece of kombu, it's not too expensive, a couple of shiitake, ginger, and then the fresh herb, the fresh spices. And if I have some fresh herbs, I'll do that too. So for example, I have some fresh thyme that is fantastic. So thyme is one of the great antivirals for this coming season. Again, there's not a lot of scientific data for thyme as an antiviral, but it's something that's been used through time as a support to the immune system. So wanted to just point that out. Okay, so, and again, we had basmati rice and mung, so I'm going to just get that out of the way. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Ayurveda, and we've gotten an introduction to the broth, and we've gotten an introduction to this soup, which is now starting to make the kitchen smell really fantastic. And I use natural light when I do this, and so forgive me for a second here. We lost the sun, so it's Phoenix, and so let me just lighten the screen up just a little bit. So, all right, let's talk about Ayurveda, and I'm going to share with you some really basic principles, things that maybe are things that you could bring into your day-to-day life. And I find that Ayurveda is something that can initially be a little bit difficult to sort of bring your awareness around. And in part, that has to do with how we have created our sort of day-to-day lifestyle here in the West. In the culture where Ayurveda was developed, which is India, there were probably more elements of mindfulness, yoga, a sort of centered spiritual life. And so sometimes jumping into Ayurveda can be a little bit challenging just for our mental constructs, believe it or not. So one of the things that I like to say is that Ayurveda literally translates as the science of life. And this was a science that was looked at over thousands of years. And initially, it was purely an oral tradition, which I think is really interesting to think about. So for millennia, paper wasn't something that was super easy to have. And so again, we're thinking about this concept of where does the knowledge come from. So thousands of years of observation with deep meditation, with spiritual practice, they began to see how the outer world and the inner world interacted. And I always like to say it's sort of akin to if you watch in a coral reef and you see the rhythm of the coral reef kind of going, the sea anemones and the seaweed, they began to notice these larger trend lines and patterns that sort of fit qualities with the 5 elements. So in Ayurveda, there's a 5-element theory, slightly different from what we see in traditional Chinese medicine, but it's earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And each of those elements are present within us in differing qualities. And each of those elements sort of serve as a precursor for qualities and functional qualities in the body. So sometimes when you're first learning Ayurveda, it's like, when you were a kid and you're joking and you said, oh, I'm not speaking Latin, right? Well, pretty much everything in Ayurveda there's no English translation. Everything remains as is in the original Sanskrit. And so this makes some of the terminology a little bit like, wait, what was that? And how does that relate? And so, initially, I always like to encourage people to recognize that there is this quality of interrelationship with the elements that just takes time, and the terminology takes time. So we can think of the 5 elements in English. We can also learn them in Sanskrit. So I won't spend too much time on the Sanskrit, but the idea here is that earth and water combine to give us kapha. And kapha is, if we think of the qualities of earth, heavy, stable, dense, hard, these qualities are present in kapha predominant individuals. I always like to say that the islanders, the people that come that have really big bone structure, lots of muscle, they're very tall. These are sort of predominantly kapha individuals. And we can all be combinations of these elements. The second primary dosha is pitta, which is a combination of fire and water. And we think about the fire elements internally as everything that's transforming. It's also how, if we think about the metabolism, all the enzymatic activities, all the detoxification pathways. So in the earlier eras, they didn't have all the complex biochemistry, but what they did have was an appreciation for how these trends and these qualities intersected, meaning all of the qualities of the enzymes and the transformation in the body are interconnected, which we really have not been able to bridge that conceptually. In our minds, we think, oh, this disaccharide, this enzyme digests disaccharides in the stomach, and this enzyme is responsible for cleaving this protein. We think about all these layers, and we don't necessarily think about these enzymes as interconnected. And so in Ayurveda, all these systems are vastly interconnected. The third dosha is vata, and vata is air and ether. And this is sort of like the movement, the connection to sort of that which is beyond us. And it offers the creative quality, it offers joy. So oftentimes the pitta person is sort of medium build, they're fiery, they've got sort of a luminosity to them, they're leaders. A lot of people in medicine have that pitta predominant because there's a lot of mental digestion. If you're a busy professional, you're probably pitta predominant. Vata predominant people tend to be slightly smaller build. You might see them as endurance runners or ballerinas. My teacher is Dr. Vasant Ladd, and he's based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he always said, the skinny mini vatas. So again, it's a lot to sort of translate Ayurveda into a lecture without slides and so on. But there are a number of resources online where you can learn more and do this sort of self-assessments. One place that's really great is my teacher, Dr. Ladd, and he's at www.ayurveda.com. And so I guess he was an early responder to the .com era. So if you had any questions, there's a lot of resources and wonderful free lectures. And so Dr. Ladd's homepage has a little section with videos, which will do this a lot more justice than what I can. But one of the things I wanted to sort of make a primary point about was that in Ayurveda, we really are thinking about how our external lifestyle, how our choices impact us. And modern lifestyle medicine has 6 main pillars: meaningful connection, stress reduction, stop smoking, removal of intoxicants, a plant-forward diet, 8 hours of restful sleep, and 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week. And interestingly enough, all of that is sitting right there inside of Ayurvedic recommendations. In fact, anything under the sun, the textbooks are huge volumes, akin to Harrison's encyclopedia, the Harrison's Internal Medicine, or the old pathology book, Robbins, I think it was, way back, where these huge volumes of books. And now, of course, we have online where we're learning up to date and things like that. But this quality that comes across in these old textbooks is sort of just so many metrics, so many ideas about how to cultivate. And Charaka is one of the primary authors. That the estimate is that the textbook is over 2,000 years old. And in one of his primary quotes that I think maybe people might be familiar with, he basically says that no disease is predetermined, that it's directly linked to the choices and lifestyle of the individual. So it's very powerful to me to think about the fact that healers have been time immemorial asking themselves the same questions, trying to sort out the same answers. And so I think this is definitely something that leaves a lot of discovery for us still. There's so much left. So to kind of conclude, in Ayurveda, there are 6 tastes, and I've given you a little bit of a chart. And you can learn a lot more about this in various books. And I was going to point out my favorite book is this one right here, and it's The Science of Self-Healing. This is a wonderful introduction to Ayurveda, The Science of Self-Healing. And it's a weekend read, I would say, available on Amazon under $10. And there's so much wisdom in here. Certainly not a substitute for your regular medical care, but I know this is a really health literate audience, and so I feel pretty comfortable recommending this. So in Ayurveda, there's 6 tastes, which is a little different than how we've been taught in the West. And these 6 tastes are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, pungent, and astringent. And each of these 6 tastes are combinations of 2 of the elements. So sweet is earth and water, sour is fire and earth, salt is fire and water, bitter is air and ether, pungent is air and fire, and astringent is air and earth. And so as you might go on and learn, you could see how these tastes might affect your individual constitution, depending on how much of the elements or the dosha you have present in your unique kind of quality. And so I think this is something really important to think about. And it's something that I have been sort of pondering in the kitchen and contemplating for a very long time. The last 30 years, you could say, how do we translate all this? What does this all mean? So, but when we start looking at a balanced diet from an Ayurvedic standpoint, there are certain flavors that tend to take us a little bit out of balance. And so the very hot, spicy foods, this pungent quality here, so chili peppers, garlic, onion, radish, mustards, and even ginger to some quality, although they all have varying degrees, sort of move the body in the direction of pungent, so air and fire. So if you have a lot of the air element or the fire element in you already, so if you're pitta or vata predominant, and you introduce this pungent quality that has air and fire in it, that begins to create foundations for imbalance. And so I think this is a really interesting way to start just noticing. And the primary taste that Ayurveda talks about that isn't the one we're as familiar with, besides pungent, is astringent. And so astringent has the qualities of air and earth. And what's beautiful about this is that many of the things in the astringent have tannins in them. So there's a really interesting conceptual framework, because I believe the tannins are a subset of polyphenols, which are a type of phytonutrient. And we find this in legumes, unripe bananas, cranberry. So it's kind of that flavor that makes your mouth pucker just a little bit, but it can be very balancing. So the biggest principle we think about in Ayurveda is that if one element is a little high, or when doshas are higher, we bring an imposing quality for balance. And this is how, over time, you begin to have a little bit more intuition as to how things land in your body. And I would definitely encourage you, if Ayurveda is something you're interested in, work with an Ayurvedic lifestyle practitioner, and they'll sit down, they'll go through a full assessment. It takes 90 minutes. And in that time frame, they'll look at all kinds of features, that your eyes, your tongue. There's several ways that the pulse is taken on the hands. They're not allowed to do physical exam unless they have a clinical kind of association, but there's a lot of very interesting insight that comes. And I usually tell people, give it at least 8 weeks before you make an assessment as to whether or not Ayurveda is landing in a way that's nourishing and sort of opening your body up to growth or change. And so this has to do with the Ayurvedic principles of nutrition, where food takes 40 days to move through the whole system. So I'm going to pause here just for a second and answer any questions that have come up. And I think that's going to, by the time I think the questions get answered, we may be sort of towards the end of our time together. So make some time for that.
Thank you, Dr. SiriChand. My mouth is watering, and I got my lunch delivered as you were cooking, so it's good timing. That looks delicious. So that you were making there, remind me the name of the recipe. What is the title?
It's just the 6 taste yellow dal soup, and so
yeah.
There is a PDF that you all can have access to that has it fully printed out, or you could hop into my Facebook group or email me if there's an issue.
And I was just curious, can you kind of eat that in every meal, or can you like add stuff to it? Yeah.
So what's fun about this is that a separate class, if you will, is the chutneys and churna spice blends that you can put on top of this. And you can just get super creative. This could be a soup base, and then you could warm it up and have a coconut chutney that you put on it, or a cilantro or a tamarind chutney. You can serve it in different ways. This is definitely something if you eat legumes. I know some folks probably in your practice are on the sort of more keto protocols where they're not eating legumes.
Different. Right.
But so this wouldn't fit into those eating paradigms. But if you're sort of in that plant forward and putting focus on grains and legumes and fresh vegetables as your protein and nutrient sources, this is a staple. There's so much nutrition in this meal. And because of the way it's cooked and the spices that are present in it, it's very easy to digest. So for example, a principle in Ayurveda is that we want to eat less once the sun sets. Some of you may have noticed, oh gosh, it's 8 p.m. and I'm starving, so I'm going to have pizza. And it's like you have like food hangover the next day, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I ate that pizza. And so, it's important to kind of keep that in mind. And so this is a great soup. You can even freeze it, have a little bit in a freezer. You can can it if you're into like homesteading things, but you can have a little bit on the ready, so that if you have an evening where you're working late or your commitments were such and you come home hungry, this is definitely something that's easier to digest on the digestive tract once you're in the evening. And we know in Ayurveda that a lightness in the digestive tract translates to deeper sleep, which again, is one of those lifestyle pillars. And we're beginning to understand how sleep deprived everyone is and how essential it is to really figuring out routes to sleeping better, but it's not often talked about how the dinner that we had or the type of food even that we had could impact our sleep.
It's so huge. About 4 or 5 different thoughts or questions just got generated from you speaking there and saying that. I would say that with sleep, 2 of the big factors are light and the timing of food, right? So it's the not eating too much after sunset, unless there's some specific cultural, like kind of eating after sunset, but otherwise, hey, your digestive enzymes are really more active. I believe you taught me that. That's more active during the middle of the day, or early in the day versus at the evening. I know we talked about that in the fellowship. The other thing is that, in terms of the food type, and a lot of people are on a keto diet, but others are more of a plant based diet. And I would say that there's not a lot of long-term evidence that keto diet's really necessarily beneficial. It's great in the short term, medium term for weight loss, for cardiometabolic syndrome, help with energy for some people. But I don't know that. I think when you look at the Blue Zones research, it definitely favors a little bit more of the Mediterranean, whole grains, legumes, plant-based, eating some protein and healthy fat. So yeah, I'm curious about that. What your thoughts are about that too?
Well, I find that I agree with you 100%. But I always like people to know when someone is presenting nutritional data to you, what they themselves eat. Yes. Because inevitably there's a selection bias in the research and in the data to what supports your particular choice, because particular food paradigms are held deeply like religion. It's very difficult. I believe there's other questions at play too, but that includes like sustainability, what's happening to factory farming. I think we all have a responsibility to sustainably source our meat if one is eating it, and being mindful. I think the data is interesting, and from an Ayurvedic standpoint, we would look at it from a doshic standpoint as to which body type would do better with the keto versus paleo versus plant forward. And so there are ways from the Ayurvedic model to begin to conceptualize nutrition that really haven't been thought about or talked about or researched.
Is keto or paleo, is that integrated in Ayurveda for some people?
No, it's not. But if you have ama and excess kapha, I'm going to speak technically here, then it's appropriate to eat lightly, to do intermittent fasting. So fasting can be quite aggravating for vata, and in some places pitta, because of the agni, can become a little bit unsteady. And so when you have a kapha predominant person who's got a lot of ama, this sort of heavy, lots of fogginess, pain in the joints, hard to wake up, mental fog. Sometimes the keto process there, because you're removing the sweet element, which is part of how kapha got out of balance.
Okay, got it.
So it's a little more technical, guys. Sorry about that. But
that's good. And Kira asked, can the 6 pillars be repeated? Can you repeat what you said about the 6 pillars of Ayurveda?
Oh, yes, the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. So and I think there's a nice meme I'll share into your Facebook group I have that's really great. It just it lines them all up. But it's so the 6 pillars are stress reduction, meaningful social interaction, and those are 2 separate ones, interestingly enough, meaning stress reduction is important, as is not being lonely or socially isolated, which I think is particularly germane in the elderly and certainly in this COVID time. The third one is 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week. The fourth one is 8 hours of restful sleep. The fifth one is a plant-forward diet. And the sixth one is not smoking or removal of intoxicants.
Great. When you say plant-forward, do you mean, how is that different than plant-based? And we talk about plant-based diet.
I think what they're trying to do is really just be inclusive for people that say, well, I'm not plant-based. So what? So it's really plant-based, but it's plant-based, and then it's okay if you have your chicken or your salmon or whatever from time to time.
That's not necessarily part of Ayurveda, like eating chicken or beef or anything. That's
what's interesting is that there is instruction around meat eating in Ayurveda, but it's typically for treatment of imbalance, which I think is also true in traditional Chinese medicine, organ meat. So there's this quality of like a symbiotic relationship to the animal that is going to be
Right.
contributing to your healing. And it's not really set up the way we have it now for mass consumption. No, that's
right.
not.
It's more like if someone's really ill and they really need to recover, then we eat some stews and things like that. And I have a curious, do you know the book? I keep on asking people this question. Do you know the book Paul Pitchford wrote? Paul Pitchford wrote a book on whole foods healing. That's one of my favorite books. Right
Yeah,
there.
love it. In fact, I might even have it right here.
So it's interesting about what he says about the sattva, like the sattva, and how the spiritual element of eating food and what happened, with the plant or the animal, and how that you take that into your body, that energy when you eat that. I'm curious what your thoughts are, your feelings are on that.
Yeah, well, I haven't eaten meat for many, many years, but it's very clear in Ayurveda, we have 3 states we can exist in: tamas, rajas, and sattva. And they say it's the angelic realm, the human realm, and the animal realm. And all kinds of different choices we make take us in and out of different versions. So someone might say, wow, that was a weird version of myself. I don't know how I was acting that way. It's not really me. So there's these qualities of that contribute to that include diet, how mindful we are, what sort of spiritual practice we may have, not religious per se, but walking in nature, prayer, meditation, however it is we connect to something that feels beyond ourselves. Those things intersect very profoundly with that way in which we exist in those different states. And so there's something called a sattvic diet, which doesn't tend to bring imbalance. So it's light in spices, meaning there's not a lot of heat in the food. There's not a lot of cayenne or sriracha or garlic or onion. It includes foods that are very light and easy to digest. So fruit, soaked nuts, honey. Ghee is included, for the record. It's not vegan. Ayurveda is not vegan, in case anybody's curious. There's 0 vegan in Ayurveda. You can translate to make it for your own life vegan, but Ayurveda there's just no way. So much medicine happens through ghee.
Right.
So, but at any rate, so this diet approach is sort of keeping us in harmony with the natural world. And it's a really beautiful way of sort of looking at food with a lot of prana, which means sort of life force intelligence or life force energy that brings that intelligence into our own awareness. And so, and our own vitality. And so people often ask me, what's your skincare program? Like, what do you do for your skin? I'm almost 50. And I'm like, I do nothing. I literally do nothing. Like, I don't have a lotion or a potion or
your
makeup.
Skin is glowing. Yes.
And it has to do with, this diet that nourishes us from the inside out. And, just that consistent series of daily choices to go towards things that are easy to digest. If there was one take home from this talk is begin just to observe. What can you digest and what can't you? And why do we continue to make the choice to incorporate things that we can't digest? And so when I say can't digest, I mean feeling gas, bloating, feeling heaviness after the meal, not having routine bowel movements. There's a whole kind of checklist that looks at.
What do you recommend for, I have a couple of things on that. What do you recommend for low stomach acid if someone has kind of digested food?
Oh,
That's one thing, yes.
Okay, so let me do that first. So one of my favorite things for that is ginger pickle. So you take ginger, you grate it like we did, cut up a piece of lime, and you put a little salt on it.
Oh, I'm going to try that. It looks nice.
Oh, it's so good.
That's some kind
I would do it now for you.
Yeah.
It's so good. Like, I love that. So just like a little bit here, you just grate it on this little grater. And then you put that onto lime with a little bit, and it's lime specifically, not lemon.
Okay.
But you can do lemon if that's all you have, but the recipe, the formula, if you will, and there's very concrete little mini formulas. I call it sort of culinary medicinal, where these are foods we eat every day, but Ayurveda has this sort of lock and key formula with how we might use it just a little bit differently that supports our health.
And you take that before the meal or during the meal?
Before the meal, about 5 minutes. But you can experiment. Is it better to do it 15 minutes? Is it better to do it right before? But that's, a lot of times people will feel invigorated just from that alone. And the other thing with this stomach acid is very interesting is that might look at smaller meals. Maybe in those circumstances that there's enough acid, but there's too much food for what it's worth. That's not always the case, but it does happen from time to time. And in Ayurveda, we say a proper meal is 2 angulis, so 2 palmfuls of food.
Like this. Yeah, that's good. That's
yeah.
really good.
Let me grab the soup real quick and let's see if we can get a look at it. I know we're about to wrap up. And it's probably not quite enough time to have cooked. No, it's not quite there. So,
okay.
Let's see here. I don't know if you're going to be able to see much. I don't think it's cooked too much to be able to see, but you get a sense of where we're going.
How long does it take to cook it on the stove?
It's on the stove about 30 to 60 minutes. Again, on the stove, you're going to want to keep a close eye on it. Once the mung is soft and the rice is cooked, you're good, because the vegetables will be cooked in that circumstance as well.
So you're doing low heat or medium heat?
Medium heat on the stove, yeah.
Okay.
You can bring it to a boil initially to kind of just, if you're in a hurry, you can bring it to a boil and then put the lid on, almost like you might be when you're making rice.
Yeah.
And you'll find that within half hour, the meal will be ready. This is going to take a little longer. Sometimes it depends on how cold. I just realized the broth was cold. So
how do you feel about soaking beans or legumes? Like, how important is that? Yeah.
So soaking beans and legumes, if you can get your kitchen flow down where you do that, go for it. There's so much health benefit and of course there's some safety things, learn the proper techniques, but soaking or sprouting even is a great technique, but I don't tend to push too much because I always feel like most people, their kitchen flow, if you will, their flow in the kitchen is like, oh my God, everyone's starving and where's the hummus or where's the cheese? So but it's not to be derogatory. It's just everyone is so busy these days. It's not like people aren't capable. It's just there's like, oh my God, my to-do list has 18 things. And I know I need to cook and prepare the meal. But so what I usually do in terms of soaking and sprouting is I do it the night before. I get started on legumes when I'm shutting down the kitchen in the evening. And it takes just a second because you really can't chase it if you haven't started it. And then I'll start the dishes in the morning.
Yeah, Mark Hyman says that cooking is one of the essential things we need to do for health, and that's the whole thing. We need to make that priority number 1, not priority number 10, really.
Right. And actually, it's funny you should say that because in the new year, I'm going to be doing an 8-week course that is sort of the integration of all these principles into one sort of journey for people.
I want to sign up for that. Yes.
Yeah, I'm still creating it and still figuring out.
Great. Well, we're excited to hear about that on Facebook, and I know it's about 1 o'clock now, and people. Thank you so much for listening, everyone, and thank you so much, Dr. SiriChand, for being on today. This has been amazing, and really appreciate you being here. So we will see you next week as well for Liz and Jared talking about psychedelic mushrooms, which is a very interesting topic. SiriChand, if you're interested in that, love to.
Yeah, well, I don't know if Liz mentioned to you, we've known each other for a very long time.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
We met through Frederique, who's a good friend of hers.
Oh, yes, right.
So Frederique's husband went to EVMS when I was there.
It's a small world. And I researched that. I went to school in Boston, but I grew up in the EVMS area. And yeah, I was born in Norfolk, and I did some research at EVMS on diabetes before med school and stuff.
Yeah. That's a small world, isn't it?
It is a small world. Oh, that's great. I'll have to tell her that you said hi and everything. And
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, great to see you, SiriChand, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.